Bonjour, and welcome to Wahsa Distance Education Center's radio Zoom classes. This is SVN3E, Grade 11 Workplace Science, and I'm the teacher, Bronwyn Slate. If you'd like to participate live today, you can call the Wahsa studio at 1-800-465-7144 or 737-4017. You can listen on the radio at 91.9 FM and also on the television at Bell Express View Channel 972. You are always welcome to join me live through the Zoom link, which is available from me, your teacher, and also your DEC. Our classes are scheduled from Monday through Thursday from 10 till 11 in the morning, and we are in our 7th week of our 9-week course. You definitely should be submitting work at this point. So a reminder, the key questions are listed at the end of each of your IL lessons. You need to do all of them. Some are check your understanding questions, some are activities, and some are review questions. Please explain your ideas and thoughts in complete sentences and make sure you're actually answering the question that is being asked. You can do this by hand or electronically. If you're going to do it by hand, you're welcome to write in your workbook. It is yours to take notes or to write in, but the spaces for the review questions in particular are not very large, so I strongly encourage you to write on a separate piece of paper in order to hand in your work in a clear way. If you're going to hand it in electronically, PDF, Word, and Google files are the easiest ones for us to access. Google Doc files everyone has access to through their NNEC email address, and we're happy to walk you through how to do that if you need help. If you need to use a different type of file, most likely it is fine. Just let us know so we can make sure we can open it. So how do you submit your work? There's 3 different methods. The first is to send your work in electronically. If you've done it by hand, you can scan it with a device. The Apple devices have a Notes app that comes with it for free, and the Android devices have a Google Drive app that comes with it for free. So you can use those to scan if need be. If you need to take pictures, that's fine. They're just scanning it are smaller files and a little bit easier for us to manage. Then you can send it to student work at nnec.on.ca, and you need to CC it to John, who is the course marker now. His email address is jstradiotto@nnec.on.ca. The second method is to drop your work off in Sioux Lookout at our location at 74 Front Street. We're the bright red building next to the post office, and we have a small white mailbox next to our side entrance. We are not yet open to the public, but hopefully soon. For now, just continue to put your work in that mailbox and we'll get it back to you as soon as we can. The third option is to hand your work into your DEC. Your DEC can either send your work through the Express or fax it to 807-737-1732 or toll-free fax to 1-800-463-7852. If you'd like to connect with me through social media, both my Facebook and my YouTube channel are under the name B Slate Wahsa. If you friend me on Facebook and subscribe to my YouTube channel, you'll get notifications every time I upload one of our lessons. All of our radio Zoom classes are recorded and uploaded to YouTube under a playlist called SVN3E, and all of our supplementary videos that are available on YouTube are also listed there so you can access them from their primary sources. Science is really visual. I incorporated as many videos, diagrams, charts, graphics, illustrations that I can in order to really help understand what it is that we're talking about. So I strongly encourage you to access the videos, either joining me live through Zoom or accessing the YouTube videos on your own time. If you do not have access to reliable internet, this is completely understandable. So please just let us know and we can send you a copy of all of our recordings. If you have any questions or concerns, please reach out to us here at Wahsa. We are here to help. If you want to talk directly about the course material as according to these videos, please contact me. My email address is bronwyn.slate@nnec.on.ca, and my Facebook is bslatewahsa. If you want to talk about something related to the assignments or marking, contact John, and his email address is jstradiotto@nnec.on.ca. You can call us both at the main office at 807-737-1488. Extension 2209 is my extension. 2210 is John's extension. You can also call us toll free at 1-800-667-3703. John's office hours are Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 3:30, although he takes lunch from 12:30 to 1:30 and is not available then. I think it's really important to position myself within the context of this course, as my educational experience shapes how I teach. I have white settler ancestry. I have white privilege, and this has shaped how I experience education, making it easier for me and I'm having less barriers than other folks. I recognize this, and while I cannot change that, I continue to work towards disrupting this cycle and making changes to our education system. I live in Northwestern Ontario on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe people, and I work to incorporate this culture and knowledge into our science courses. As an educator, I have lots to learn and unlearn, and this is a lifelong journey that I'm committed to, though I will make mistakes. Our textbook is also Eurocentric, meaning that it centers the white experience in both the communities that it showcases and also the scientists that it refers to. It ignores Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis knowledges and experiences, and this is problematic and disappointing. Unfortunately, I've not been able to find another resource, and when I'm no longer responsible for this course at the end of term 1A, I will not be able to, it will not be my job and my priority to find this. Hopefully, Wahsa will continue to look for more meaningful resources.
All right, we are now on Unit 6. We have this unit and then Unit 7, and that is the end. So Unit 6 is a really, really short unit. There are only 2 lessons, and then we will start Unit 7, which is only, I think, 3 lessons. So we have very few new material lessons left. So Unit 6 is talking about healthy ecosystems. Since the 1980s, populations of frogs and other amphibians have dropped sharply worldwide. Some 170 species have now gone extinct. Global warming seems to be a major cause. Tadpoles eat algae that use up dissolved oxygen needed by aquatic organisms. Frogs eat mosquitoes and flies and insect larvae, helping to keep their numbers down. Fish, turtles, larger frogs, herons, and other aquatic predators eat tadpoles and frogs. Land animals such as raccoons, otters, and foxes also eat frogs. Without this food source, their numbers drop. So this is one example of how a healthy ecosystem needs all of its members. When one is just threatened or wiped out, it affects the others. So if there are less frogs and tadpoles, that means the algae will grow and thrive, and that takes up the oxygen that other plants and animals in the water need. It also means that the frogs won't eat the mosquitoes and flies and insect larvae, and still be more bugs. It also means that the fish, turtle, and larger frogs and other predators that eat frogs will not have that food source. So it ripples out and has a big impact, which then has a big impact on other ecosystems, as if there are less herons because there are less frogs, then that has an impact on other things, or it's a ripple effect. So in lesson 19 today, the importance of biodiversity to the sustainability of life is what we're going to be looking at. So at the end of this lesson, you'll be able to describe the 3 types of biodiversity, and you'll be able to discuss the value of biodiversity to ecosystem strength. You know you've met the learning goals because you can explain the difference between community, genetic, and species biodiversity, and you can explain how abiotic and biotic factors have great impact on the health of the ecosystems. All good if none of that makes any sense yet. That is what we're talking about today. So first, what are the types of biodiversity? Well, first, let's understand what biodiversity means. So the variety of different species of microorganisms, animals, and plants living on Earth is what we mean by biodiversity. So just having a diverse set of living creatures, whether they are animals, plants, or other microorganisms like bacteria or algae or things like that. So no organism can live without interacting with other organisms or substances. None of us live in isolation. None of us live in a vacuum. Ecosystems include different types of living organisms and a variety of non-living factors. Without biodiversity, whole ecosystems could not survive. All life forms on Earth have evolved in response to other organisms and non-living factors. So again, because we can't live without each other, we have learned to live with each other. So there are 3 types of biodiversity on Earth. We call them community, genetic, and species biodiversity. So all 3 of these types are important to sustaining life within our ecosystems. So first, let's look at community biodiversity. This refers to different types of communities or ecosystems that exist on Earth. Sometimes it's called ecosystem biodiversity. So these are desert communities, swamp communities, fast-flowing river communities, communities that exist in places where the river meets the ocean, tide pool communities, forest communities, mountain communities, right? Like prairie communities, all of these different areas where there are different features that sort of define that space have different communities of creatures, living and non-living, plants, animals, etc. So the list of community types on Earth is vast and varied. These are only just a few things that I've listed. There are so many different ecosystems and communities that have different plants and animals within them. So then we have genetic biodiversity. And this involves the differences that occur within a single species. So first, let's remember a species is a related group of organisms that share a similar form and are able to produce offspring. So genetic biodiversity are differences within those similar species, or those species that are similar to each other. So all organisms have genes in the DNA of their cells that store information about inherited characteristics. Sometimes different individuals of the same species have different characteristics. So for example, some orca pods eat seals, where other orca whales eat fish. So the idea of this is that for the orca example, means that they're not competing with each other for food source. The fact that some eat fish means and others eat seals means that they're not all trying to eat fish. So that means that the greater number of adults reproducing, because there's more surviving because they have different food sources, then the greater of the variety of genes being passed on, and means results in a greater genetic diversity, which means that they are likelier to survive. So genetic biodiversity gives species a better chance of adapting to new circumstances. So as the environment changes, as things change, if there is more genetic diversity, then they're less likely to die off because they're not all going to be affected in the same way. If all the fish are dying because they can't eat the frogs, then the orcas that eat the seals are going to survive, whereas the orcas that eat the fish are not. I don't know if there are any orcas that eat fish that eat frogs, but that's just a connection from what we've been saying. So Charles Darwin noticed that different species of finches on the Galapagos Islands have the same common finch ancestor, but they each have a different type of beak. So this I thought was interesting to look at in your textbook to see this example. So each of these different finches have evolved to take advantage of different types of food. Genetic diversity in the common ancestor led to different species evolving. So here, they all started off in the same place. They all started off as one finch, but you can see that they have different beaks, quite significantly different beaks. And so some of them are, so there's tree finches over here, and they eat fruit or insects. Then there's a cactus ground finch. Then there's our finches over here that have, some eat cactus, some eat seeds, and their bills do different things. So even like to me, I'm like, this bill and this bill don't look that different to me. But these ones are, this one says it's a pear-like bill or a grasping bill. So how they pick up, how they use their bills are different, whereas these ones are crushing bills and they crush seeds so they could eat. So the fact that all of these birds have originated from the same place, from the same ancestor, but they have gone through slightly different genetic adjustments means that they're not all competing for the same food type, which means that they are going to survive. They can survive together. And if anything were to happen to all the seeds, all of a sudden there weren't any seeds, and then these ground finches died out because there aren't any seeds, these other finches would still survive because they eat other things. That is the idea, which is pretty cool. And then we have species biodiversity. So species, so this refers to the millions of different species of life on Earth. So there are current estimates for the number of species on Earth to range between 5.3 million and 1 trillion. I believe in your book it says 10 million to 30 million. But there has been research done since your book was published and conversations about how the sorts of things that were missed out and were not counted. There was in 2011, I think that was listed that like 8.7 million was like, this is the exact amount, or roughly. But then they realized that they didn't talk about microorganisms, which are things that we can't necessarily see. They're so tiny, or even species that live inside of other species that would be able to be classified as species. So there are approximately 2 million are recorded, but we think that this is a really, really small portion of all of the number of species that are actually exist in our world, because we haven't discovered every single inch of every single thing, and we can't actually do that. So it's a very small bit that we do know. But beyond just not knowing all of them, unfortunately, Earth is losing biodiversity. So scientists are realizing that we're not going to be able to catalog all of the different species on Earth before many of them become extinct, because of the climate crisis, because climate change, things are shifting, animals, plants are being affected before we can even necessarily learn about them. They are being wiped out and we don't have a chance to learn about them. So that is just something to sort of reflect upon. So here is a diagram that shows the different sort of types of species. So we have plants is sort of one area, but then within plants, we have diversity within there. So we have algae, lichens, angiosperms, ferns and allies, mosses, fungi. These are all different kinds of some kinds of plants, right? Those aren't even all of the kinds of plants. Those are just one example of the plants within our world. Then we have invertebrates. So we have insects and mollusks, crustaceans, other groups of animals. And then we have vertebrates, where we have fish, mammals, birds, reptiles, and amphibians. So you can see just the extent of different types of species that we have and why there's such a vast amount that we don't know. So that leads us to this idea that we're losing biodiversity, leads us to the idea of the sixth mass extinction. So a little bit of history thrown into science today. In Earth's history, there have been 5 mass extinctions where many species have died out. So they have resulted due to environmental factors. So this could be volcanic activity, sea level changes, ice ages, or asteroid impacts. The last mass extinction was about 65 million years ago, when 75% of all species on Earth, including the dinosaurs, became extinct. So this is it's something that we sort of think about in terms of the impact of, we say there was an asteroid that hit the Earth and that changed everything, and then all the dinosaurs died out, and that's why we don't have dinosaurs. But this was 6 million years ago, so this was a long time ago, and 75% of all the species on the Earth became extinct. So 75% of the things that were living on the Earth were wiped out completely, and that left only 25% to continue to evolve and survive and have become the creatures that are on the Earth today. So that's kind of wild. And this was the last mass extinction. So there were 4 other ones that happened before that. Now, many scientists believe that Earth is currently going through a 6th mass extinction. So the rate at which species are now becoming extinct is faster than the general rate at which species have died out over the past 60 million years. So things are dying fast, basically. Since the last extinction, new species have evolved more quickly than existing species have died out. This has meant that Earth's community genetic and species biodiversity has increased during that time. So we have more diversity, but things are also dying out faster. However, because of human activities resulting in environmental damage, pollution, and global warming, species are becoming extinct faster than new species are evolving. So there was some hope of things evolving and doing well, but now because of global the climate crisis, the impacts of our actions are greatly impacting the new species and the health of the species in general. So let's look specifically at species at risk in Canada. So since the arrival of the first European settlers, more than 30 wildlife species have become extinct in Canada. So this isn't just in the last few hundred years, 30 species have come completely extinct. So at present, over 500 plants and animal species are considered at risk. Everywhere in Canada, people are engaged in recovery activities that benefit more than 200 species. So we are aware that these things are in risk, and we're trying to work to make change. So just a little bit of language to make sure we're on the same page. Extinct means a wildlife species that no longer exists. You can't find it anywhere in the world. It's alive. Extirpated is a wildlife species that no longer exists in the wild in Canada, but could be occurring elsewhere. So it could be occurring elsewhere in the world, or it could also be occurring in Canada in a wildlife preservation space or a zoo or something like that, where it is being taken care of by humans in order to help hope that they don't become extinct. Endangered is when a wildlife species faces imminent extirpation or extinction. Threatened, a wildlife species likely to become endangered if limiting factors are not reversed. And then there's special concern is when a wildlife species that may become a threatened or endangered species because of a combination of biological characteristics and identified threats. So this is just sort of the scale in terms of paying attention to species that are at risk, both within Canada, but also around the world. So here is a quick video that talks a little bit about what folks are doing.
The barn owl, the swift fox, the Newfoundland martin. These are just a few of the species at risk in Canada today because of human activities threatening their habitat. But it's not just wildlife that's at risk. Think about it. Healthy habitats are essential to healthy wildlife, and ultimately, a healthy environment for us humans. The good news is we can all do things to better coexist with wildlife. It's all about protecting and revitalizing wildlife habitat. For instance, when you're hiking, stay on the trail to avoid disturbing wild plants and animals. When you're shopping, you can help reduce waste by using a cloth bag or a recycled one. In your community, get involved in wildlife habitat conservation efforts. And that's just a start, because individually and collectively, we can all do our part to help species at risk. Find out more at hww.ca.
All right, so like I said, super short video that just sort of talks a little bit about what we can do and what we can consider in terms of how to protect these environments and these animals. So there are lists of wildlife species that are at risk. There's lots of different ones. Here I grabbed a couple of images. I thought I was going to remember these names, but I don't remember the names of these different animals, but these are all different animals that are at risk in Canada. I haven't seen any of these animals or plants, So I'm not surprised that they're at risk. There is a, did I not link it? Let me just see if I can find, I had a list to where, no, I guess I didn't link it. Just give me a second. So there's a list of where you can go and you can find all the species that are at risk in Canada. So you can search or you can just find this list. And it shows you, it lists all of these different animals, and it's a long list. So they talks about, so there doesn't list any extinct animals. And I don't know if that means that there aren't extinct or if that's just not what this list is about. It shows you the extirpated species. So remember, these are the ones that are only alive in contained, they're not alive in the wild. So they range. So there's to have mammals, which there's a ferret, walrus, and a gray whale. Then there's birds, greater prairie chicken. These are the animals that I had. So that is a ferret. This is a ferret. This is a greater prairie chicken. Then there is, I don't remember if this is the this is the eastern turtle or not, or if it's the other turtle. Oops. There is the paddlefish, different mollusks, different animals, insects, and then plants. This is the spring blue-eyed Mary. And then they have a whole list of endangered things. So they have the mammals, and then you can continue, you can just see how long that list is. Then birds, and again, so these ones are without, if we don't act, these are going to become extinct potentially. And then amphibians. So really it's across the board. It's not anything, one area that we're doing great and one area that we're doing poorly. Reptiles, fish. And you can come back and you can look at this if you want to look at more specific about these animals or plants, mollusks, arthropods. So these are like insects. And plants. So, and you can just see how long this list is. Like it's surprising. I found it surprising how long this list is. These are more plants. We're only at us. We're getting our way through there, but lichens, mosses, and then they have a whole list of threatened as well. So again, going through the same thing of the mammals and birds, amphibians, reptiles, fish, mollusks, arthropods, plants, lichens, mosses, and then special concerns. So they have all the various levels. They tell you about, you can have this big long list that just shows you all of the different creatures that are at risk in Canada. This isn't even in any other place in the world. This is just Canada. So I will link this in the show notes so that you can, if you are interested, you can check out this the site, and you can look a little bit more if you're curious about the animals that are at risk in Canada. So why should we care? Really, because we're not being threatened, but we're not on the list. So what's the value of biodiversity to humans and the effects of extinction? So losing biodiversity on Earth is a serious concern. So biodiversity is the key to healthy ecosystems, both terrestrial or aquatic, so on land or in water. Humans rely on biodiversity to provide them with ecological goods and services. Ecological goods and services are benefits gained from the functioning of healthy ecosystems such as food, pollination, and pest control. the goods and services people gain from biologically diverse ecosystems have an economic impact. So for example, things that I hadn't really considered, pest control services freely provided by birds in Canada's boreal forests are estimated to be worth about $5.4 billion a year. So birds eating bugs, eating insects, eating mosquitoes, eating things that then would eat other plants, opposed to just irritate us. That pest control is, birds just do it naturally because they're surviving, but that's estimated to be the equivalent of 5.4 billion. If we don't have those birds, we would have to be investing that much to do the same work that those birds are doing. Also, the value of the food harvested in the boreal forest, such as wild rice or mushrooms, is at least $79 million per year. So accessing wild sources of food, again, is something that we that would have an economic impact if we didn't have access to that. So here are some other examples. So thinking about the good or the service that we receive from the natural environment, from which be due to biodiversity. So in terms of food, fruits and berries, nuts, grain, vegetables, and legumes and animals, a diverse diet keeps us healthy. So we need a variety of things. Yes, everyone has their own particular health needs, but as an entire species, we need the variety to be the most healthy. Waste treatment. So decomposers help break down biodegradable waste. Waterways and organisms living in them act as filters to keep water clean. So if we didn't have decomposers, then they would mean that a lot of, like, when animals would die or when plants would die, that would just build up. If we didn't have things that treat those, if we didn't have scavenger animals, if we didn't have fungi or bacteria that would break those things down, they would just build up. Soil formation, which relates to the decaying organisms contribute to nutrients to soil. So if we didn't have things to help to process those dead organisms, then we wouldn't have any way for those nutrients to go back into the soil. A variety of decomposers help break down organic material into soil. So soil dwellers such as worms ensure soil contains air pockets and is able to hold water and allow plants to grow. If we wipe out the worms, then we don't have access to that service. Production of oxygen. Through photosynthesis, trees and other green plants take in carbon dioxide and release oxygen to the environment. Canada's boreal forest has been called the lungs of the north because of the amount of oxygen it produces. So we are super dependent upon plants to not only process the carbon dioxide so that we're not breathing that in, but to create our oxygen or release our oxygen, which we need to survive. Pollination. So worldwide value of pollination services provided by animals in grasslands, rangelands, and croplands is valued at $117 billion per year. If our pollinators are wiped out, we will be significantly impacted. We will not be able to grow our food in the same way that we are currently growing our food. 'Tis the season for many folks to not mow their lawns and let the original or the early weeds grow and such, and also to not disturb the nests of butterflies and bees so that they can wake up and get healthy and there be enough food for them to survive, because they are our natural pollinators and they help us so that our food and our plants all grow. Then also pest control again. So just a little bit more of a detailed list. So birds, wasps, spiders, bats, and other animals regulate populations of organisms considered pests. So mosquitoes, mice, ants, those things. I really don't want those things to take over. So having these other animals and features that keep those under control, really benefit from. And then we also have climate regulation. So plants and trees performing photosynthesis take carbon dioxide out of the air and help to keep global temperatures from rising. So not only does this help us from keeping us being able to breathe with oxygen, but also keeping our temperature regulated. And then disease control. Different organisms such as birds and bats prevent the spread of disease carried by pests such as mosquitoes carrying West Nile. in Canada. So a quarter of our pharmaceutical drugs are derived from plants. So we are really dependent upon our natural environment, and it's kind of mind-boggling when you think about it, how dependent we are upon the biodiversity of our natural environment and how we are not taking care to protect it. All right, so now you should be able to answer your key question on page 157, number 1. And so now we want to continue with abiotic and biotic factors. So what is that talking about? So the components of in an ecosystem work together in balance to keep communities healthy. These components include both abiotic and biotic factors. Abiotic factors are the non-living parts of the environment. So the rocks, the water, the sunlight, the climate, whereas biotic factors are all living things in the environment, plants, animals. Biotic factors interact with each other and with abiotic factors in an ecosystem to survive. This is that back to that idea that we don't live in a vacuum, that we're all dependent upon each other. So how does this affect biodiversity? So species are successful when they have all the biotic and abiotic factors they need to grow and reproduce. For example, maple trees need a certain amount of sunlight and good soil to grow tall. When one of the factors is missing or a harmful factor is present, a species' success is limited. Its population will stop growing and perhaps decrease. Maple trees in your area might grow more slowly or die if the weather is too dry or if an insect destroys their leaves. So what are some limiting factors? So these are factors in the environment that prevent a population of organisms from growing. They might also prevent organisms from moving into another geological area. Limiting factors can be both biotic or abiotic. Here is a list from your textbook of the different kinds of limiting factors. So both climate and plants, no, it's not a cross, it's just a general list, my bad. I was thinking that it was a cross, but that's not how it's. So very abiotic factors are climate, temperature, precipitation, sunlight, soil, which remember is clay, dry, fertile, infertile, sandy, space for species activities, nutrients, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus are some examples, water are all abiotic factors, things that impact the biodiversity of ecosystems. Then biotic factors are plants, animals, bacteria, fungi, viruses, parasites. These are all the living things that are in different ecosystems. And then some limiting factors are scarcity of water or sunlight, absence of prey, too few members of a population to reproduce and pass on genetic diversity. So these are things that are going to limit the success of the different plants and animals or the health of the abiotic and biotic factors. So an important limiting factor for fish, for example, is the amount of dissolved oxygen in the water. Trout thrive in cool, high oxygen water in the higher parts of the rivers flowing into lakes. Walleye and bass can live in less oxygen in warmer, lower sections of the rivers and in the mouths of lakes. So if either of these change, that means that that's going to affect these animals. Having them have strengths in different areas means that they're spread out and they're not all accessing the same resources. But if the water temperature or the oxygen level would change, that's going to change who can survive in what parts of the rivers. Then other limiting factors for these fish can include individual fisheries, commercial fisheries, pollution, and the introduction of invasive species. So for example, all of these factors have meant declining fish populations in the Great Lakes, which impacts the rest of the lake's ecosystems as well as human populations. Again, the ripple effect. Blue walleye, for example, once abundant in the Great Lakes, is now extinct there because of such factors as pollution, overfishing, and invasive species. So that talks about abiotic and biotic factors and limiting factors. So hopefully now you can answer question 1 on page 159. So then we're going to look at a quick case study about the Humboldt squid. So the story of the Humboldt squid is one that includes abiotic and biotic factors, limiting factors, and the effects of human activities on biodiversity and climate change. Some species are dying out because of pollution, overhunting, loss of habitat, because of humans, industries, and climate change. Others seem to be expanding their populations and their ranges. The Humboldt squid is an example of one that is expanding. So this is different than what we've been talking about. We've been talking about things that have been extinct and been being killed off. The Humboldt squid is something that is thriving. The Humboldt, or jumbo, squid lives in the Pacific Ocean. It is a large, aggressive aquatic organism that preys on many other aquatic organisms, including other Humboldt squids. Mexican fisheries have called it the Diablo Rojo, the red devil, because it has been known to attack people. So here is an image of it. It is huge. These are all dead, I'm assuming, because they are not moving. But you can look at videos and you can see just how intense and strong they are. The squid's usual range is from Tierra del Fuego in the southern tip of Argentina to Baja California. During warm weather years in the mid-1930s and in 1997, the Humboldt squid ventured farther north along the Californian coast than was normal for them. But in both cases, the squid returned to their usual range the next year. Then in 2002, the squid came back to the northern Pacific coastal waters, and they have stayed. So since 2002, so 20 years, they have moved into a new region. So here's an image where you can see where this red part is where they naturally were. And then this purpley blue part is this invasive range. So they've gone further south and much, much further north, all the way up to Alaska in some parts, because the water has warmed up and they will survive and have access to a much larger coastal region. Most scientists believe that a change in water temperature caused by climate change has allowed the squid to expand its territory. The squid spends most of its time 100 to 600 meters below the surface in low oxygen water. This zone is called the mid-oxygen minimum zone. Because of global warming, the zone is expanding towards the ocean surface. With an extended range, both in length and depth, the squid is taking over its new northern territory. Humboldt squid come up to the surface to feed on just about anything that can grab with their two feeding tentacles and pull it into their baseball-sized beaks. Anchovy, hake, rockfish, sardines, other squid, and shrimp are at risk. In BC, some biologists are concerned that young salmon are also falling prey to the squid. This new feeding relationship could potentially reduce the biodiversity of fish species. These squids are doing so well that they're wiping out other aquatic animals. Scientists are calling the squid a global warming winner because the limiting factors that once kept them to a certain territory are changing as the water temperature warms up. That's just a really interesting focus of different ways that things can be impacted, opposed to just it being reduced, but also something not having the limiting factors and therefore taking over and becoming more of an invasive species than just naturally on its own. So let's wrap up what we have talked about today. So our lesson 19 highlights are the importance of biodiversity. So first we talked about biodiversity and what it was and the three different types. So we had community or ecological diversity, which are ecosystem variety present within a geographical area. So the fact that we have different areas that have different ecosystems in our world. Then we have genetic diversity, which is the genetic variability present within the species. So that was remember the example of the orcas or the finches that had evolved to be able to feed on different things in order to not be in competition with themselves. And then we have species diversity, which is the variety of species and abundance of species in our world, and how we have a range of millions to trillions of different types of species in our world, and how we are all dependent upon each other. I mean, not directly, but indirectly, and we work together. Then we talked about abiotic and biotic factors. So abiotic being non-living factors that have an impact on our biodiversity, and biotic being living factors that have an impact on our biodiversity. And then we finally talked about the Humboldt squid as an example of the global warming winner, or how the limiting factors have decreased, and that has meant that they've been able to thrive in our current environment, which means that they are taking over and threatening other plants and animals, just because they are changing those ecosystems and the biodiversity in those environments, which then again has a ripple effect. So hopefully your success criteria, you can explain the difference between community, genetic, and species biodiversity. And you can explain how abiotic and biotic factors have a great impact on the health of ecosystems. Your review questions are on page 161 and numbers 1 through 8. So that is a wrapping up for our lesson today. Thanks so much. If you have any questions or concerns, please, as always, reach out to me. You could get a hold of me at 807-737-1488, extension 2209, or you can also call me toll free at 1-800-667-3703. You can always get a hold of me by email at bronwyn.slate, which is spelled BRONWYN.SLATE@nnec.on.ca. You can connect with me through Facebook at bslate Wahsa. And remember, our lessons are uploaded to YouTube, also at bslate Wahsa. Then a final reminder that our course is over on June 10th, and all of your work needs to be in by June 10th. So please get working and get handing stuff in so that you can be successful with your credit. I hope you have a lovely day. Thanks so much for joining me. Miigwech.